Today's class is called Happy Hips. It's a cross-training class that I made for runners and cyclers, but really this is the perfect class for anybody. Most of the time our hips are just moving in flexion and extension, that's forward and back, but our hips can move in many ways. So this class is going to get our hips moving in all sorts of ways, in all planes of motion, so that we can keep our hips happy. Let's start on our backs. So come onto the ground, checking in with that triple S. That's the back of your skull touching the ground, your shoulder blades, and your sacrum, which is right above your tailbone, the lowest part of the spine. We'll start with our hands right on either the pelvis, the front of the pelvis, or to the thighs. Pushing your feet into the ground, let's use the glutes to lift up into a low bridge. Staying low enough that your back ribs stay on the ground, so we're not going to lift way up high in our bridge. We want the neck to stay neutral, which means our chin is slightly toward the throat, back of the neck is long. Now, right away, we want to feel those glutes start to warm up as we bring the hips into a little bit of extension, which is what bridge pose is. So we always want to use our glutes when we're extending the hips. We'll be doing different hip extension movements in this class. Now, holding here in your bridge, we'll start to flap the knees out and in. This is going to be a lot smaller than you think. If you flap the knees out too far, you'll roll onto the pinky toes, and we want to keep our feet rooted down, which means we're pressing into the big toe, pinky toe, and heel. So they're just these tiny little flaps of the knees out and then back up toward the ceiling. So this is hip abduction. So one of the different ways we're going to be moving the hips. Your tailbone should feel like it's reaching toward the heels. Glutes are obviously still working. Tiny little pulses out and in. Keep those big toes down. Bring the knees to point up toward the ceiling again, and we'll slowly lower down. Once you get that triple S down, we'll interlace the hands behind the head. Draw your elbows in towards your forehead. Take a huge breath in. On an exhale, pull your belly button down toward the ground. Just try to lift off the shoulder blades. A small lift, pointing those elbows up. Inhale to lower. Exhale, lift up. Feel your belly button pull down toward the ground as you lift off the shoulder blades. Lean your head back into your hands so you're not pulling on the neck. Inhale, lower. Exhale, lift. Reach those elbows up toward the ceiling. Hold your low back down so that it's touching the ground. Extend your right leg out. Abduct your right hip. Keep the toes facing up. We'll slightly move the leg to the right. Bring it back to center. Step it down. Inhale, lower. Exhale, lift. Lean your head back. Pull your belly button down. Left leg extends. Keep the toes facing the same way they are now. Slightly move the leg to the left. Bring it back to center. Step it down. Inhale, lower. Exhale, lift. Lean your head back. Lift off those shoulder blades. Right leg extends. Keep the toes facing the same way they are now. Slightly bring your leg to the right. Bring it back to center. Step it down. Inhale and lower. Exhale, lift. Keep your low back down. Lean your head back. Reach those elbows up. Left leg extends. Abduct that left hip out to the left. Hold your low back down. Bring it back. Step it down. Inhale and lower. Let's head to quadruped, coming to hands and knees. In quadruped, we want our shoulders right over our wrist, and we want to walk the knees in a little bit closer toward the hands so that we can keep our spine neutral. Don't let your ears drop below your shoulders. Try to lift the front of your throat up. Now we want to keep our shoulder blades neutral, which means we're softening the chest down instead of rounding the upper back. So you want to slightly draw those shoulder blades in toward the spine. Imagine balancing something on your lower back. Hover your right knee up. It's just a hover off the ground. Don't let that shift you over toward the left. So the goal is for our only thing moving to be the right hip as we start to make some tiny circles with this right hip joint. We're going to circle in both directions, but try not to move anything else. Imagine balancing a glass of water on your lower back while you do this. Circling both ways, not letting the lower back move, not letting the head drop. Lower that right knee down. Recheck that your spine is in that neutral position. Hover the left knee. Don't let your weight shift into that right hip and right arm. Circle this left hip. So think about drawing your circles at the top of that left thigh. If we think about drawing circles with the knee, the circles are probably going to be a little bit too big, which will make the pelvis start to move. And we're trying to isolate just this left hip. So we have to work the arms pretty hard in order to not let anything else move. Make sure your head's not dropping down. Lower it down. Coming into a down dog, weight will stay in the hands, press into the roots of your fingers, tuck the toes, lift your hips as high as you can, but keep your knees bent. So we're gonna lift our hip creases up. That's right where our thigh bone inserts into the hip. So as we lift the hip creases up, keep pushing into the fingers. Our hips are flexing in downward dog. So that's when our torso is toward the thigh or thigh toward the torso. Lift your front ribs up towards your back ribs or up and away from the ground. We don't want to be dropping the chest here. We want to feel really strong in the shoulders. If it feels good, you can pedal the feet out or move around in whatever way feels good for you in downward dog, but really hold the arms nice and strong. From your downward dog, carefully lower both knees down to the ground. Quadruped, you can untuck the toes. Right foot will step through. We're heading into a 90-90 low lunge. So instead of taking a wide sinking type of low lunge, our left hip is over that left knee and our tailbone is reaching down. So it might feel like slightly tucking the tailbone under if you're used to this type of lunge. So you want that tailbone reaching down. Left arm will reach up. Right hand can come to the right thigh. It can come to the outer right hip. Lift your left fingertips up as high as you can, reaching that left shoulder blade up. Now keep that upward lift. Take a side bend to the right, but keep reaching your tailbone down. Hopefully feeling a stretch at the front of that left hip. Make sure you're not holding your breath. Lift up. Hands can come down as we swivel this left foot over toward the right side of the mat. Lifting back up, you can turn a little bit toward the side of your mat. Adjust as needed. So our right hip is externally rotated. Tighten this left glute. Hands can come to the sides of the hips if that feels good. Start to gently ease into some of these groin rocks here. So you can let that right knee go past the heel or the toes as much as you can, but don't let this right heel lift up. So we're keeping that right heel down as we rock, keeping some engagement in the legs. So we don't want to feel like we're sinking into this. We still want some muscle engagement here as we stretch into that right inner thigh or groin area. Also getting that ankle dorsiflexion on the right foot. Keep the glutes active. Bring the hands in front of you. Turn those right toes toward the side of the mat, and we'll rock. These can be tiny rocks, really slow rocks, getting into the adductors or inner thighs. Make this as gentle as it needs to be. It should feel like a good stretch or pull. Turn it back toward the front of your mat into your quadruped. Left foot steps through. Right knee comes in for that 90-90 lunge. Now again, we're not sinking down. We're in a shortened stance. Our right glute is squeezing a bit. Tailbone is reaching down. Left arm to the thigh or the hip, right arm up. Lift the right side up. So right shoulder blade, right fingertips. Keep that right glute on as we side bend to the left. Check in with your breath. Lift up. Hands can come down while you swivel that right shin. Turn to the side of the mat, adjust as needed. Now left hip is externally rotated. Right glute is pushing that right hip forward a little bit. Start to do those rocks. So now we're getting into that left groin or inner thigh and into that left ankle dorsiflexion. So keep that left heel down. Don't let it lift up. Only rock as far as it feels good. And again, we're not sinking into this. So my legs are staying active, my glutes are staying active. Let's bring the hands down, parallel that left foot, starting those adductor rocks. Try to keep that right pinky toe down so we're not just rolling to the inner arch of that left foot. Turn it back to the front. You have the option to take cat-cow, take child's pose, or come to downward dog. Take a couple breaths wherever you are. If you're in down dog, you can shorten the stance. Let the knees bend so that you can flex the hips, lifting those hip creases up, lifting the ribs up. Let's meet in quadruped, hands and knees. Right foot steps through. Let's tuck the left toes under. Back to that 90-90 lunge. Ears are over your shoulders, shoulders are over your pelvis. Tighten that left glute. Fists are going to come together. Picture headlights at the front of your pelvis facing straight forward. Keep those headlights forward as we turn the ribs just 1 or 2 inches to the right. It's a really small rotation, and then back. Now rotate to the left. Keep those headlights facing forward, back to center. You're going to keep going, rotating right and left. So we're trying to isolate rotating in the thoracic spine. That's the mid and upper back, while we keep the pelvis and the low back really stable. Make sure that left glute is on. Hands come down, untuck the left toes, right leg back, 3-legged quadruped. Don't let the low back arch. Lift the low belly, lift the front of the throat, bend your right knee. Now we'll rotate the hip. The goal is to not move anything but the hip, so hold the spine still. Externally rotate that right hip. Our right thigh bone is rotating out to the right, and then internally rotating back in toward the body. Externally rotate, hold the low back still. Internally rotate, press evenly into the hands. Externally rotate. Internally rotate. Externally rotate, nothing else moves. Internally rotate. Lower to quadruped. Left foot steps through. Let's tuck the right toes. Lift up. Picture a broom behind your back, touching the back of your skull, your shoulder blades, and your sacrum. Keep that right glute nice and active. Fists together. Picture those headlights at the front of your pelvis. Stay forward as you rotate the ribs to the left, through center, and to the right. So you can go even slower if you want, but we should feel that pull or stretch hopefully at the front of the right hip. Really keep that right glute active. Rotating just above the pelvis, staying stable down below. Hands come down, untuck those right toes, left leg back, 3-legged quadruped. Lift the throat. Picture that glass of water on your low back as you bend the left knee. Keep everything still as you externally rotate the left hip, internally rotate, externally rotate, internally rotate. If you have a yoga block, it's great to put a yoga block on your lower back while you're doing this, because you'll know if you're moving at the pelvis as you rotate or if you're truly just isolating that left hip. Last one. Lower down, tuck the toes. We'll come to downward dog, shortening the stance, softening the knees so we can lift the hip creases up, lifting the front ribs, maybe pedaling the feet out if you want, pressing into the roots of the fingers. Take the feet a little bit wider in your down dog And we'll keep the knees bent as we walk the hands back toward the feet for a happy squat. You can be on fingertips, you can be on blocks with the hands. Hands can be at the shins or up at the thighs, but our goal is to move the hip creases back. So this is flexing the hips as well. We're actually in something called triple flexion. That's flexion at the ankles, the knees, and the hips. Keep your spine long as you push down, rise up. At the back of the mat, we'll flex our right hip. Float your right thigh up, push that left foot down. Left hand will cross over, or you can use the right hand, same arm as leg. Try to push that right thigh down, but don't let it move. So we're waking up our right hip flexor as we push the thigh away, push the thigh back into the hand. Step it forward, float the left thigh up. We're flexing the left hip, hand to the thigh, push down, but don't let that left thigh move. Using that left hip flexor to resist, step it forward. Flex the right hip, push down into that right thigh, push down into the left foot, kick that left glute on. One more, step it forward. Flex the left hip, hand to thigh, resist, push down into that right foot, release it. Take your right foot, step it back into a high lunge. So we'll soften our right knee so that we can keep the pelvis upright. Just like our low lunge, we don't want to be so far back that we tip the pelvis forward. We want to keep that right knee bent, holding our pelvic bowl upright. Let's either bring the hands to the hips, or you can bring one hand behind the head, one hand at the sacrum. So that's right above the tailbone, just to make sure we're keeping the spine long. You have the option to stay here in your lunge or add some pulses. If you're pulsing, they can be so small. Both knees bend. So just waking up the legs a little bit more, or pause and just really focus on that high lunge. Now we'll externally rotate our right hip as we turn to the side of the mat for a squat. Heels in, toes out to your comfortable amount. Just like our lunge, you can stay still or you can pulse. We're going to keep going back and forth between those two movements, so you don't have to be doing the same pace I am. Now we'll internally rotate the right hip as we turn back to the front, back to our lunge. Pause in your lunge or pulse it. Keep the spine long. Externally rotate the right hip when you're ready. Open out for that squat. Pulse or stay still. So keep going. Just like we've been practicing, try to just move the hip without changing your spine or your posture. Really waking up the legs. Heading to your squat when you're ready. Tailbones reaching down. Now the next time you come to your squat, let's pause. Notice where the legs might be feeling tired or warm. Let's straighten, turn the toes forward. Left foot will step behind you into a curtsy squat. Both knees bend, and then we'll tap the left foot out to the left. Curtsy squat, tap the left foot to the left. Keep going. You can go even slower. You can also lift the foot off the ground. So this is that same action we did in our core work. This is hip abduction. So right now we're coming from a curtsy squat to abducting the left hip. That's when the leg moves away from the body, or the hip moves away from the body out to the side. So this is an action we don't do that much. And this is working our outer hip, or our glute medius. So we want to make sure we can get the glutes from all angles as we move the hips in all directions. Last one. Step your left foot out to the left. Take the feet as wide as you want. Let's side lunge to the left and side lunge to the right. Keep going. As you side lunge, the goal is to keep the spine long. Don't let your head drop down. Try not to let your shoulders round forward or round your upper back. We're flexing the hips here, so our torso is coming toward the thigh. When you side lunge to the right, you're flexing that right hip. Come back up, turn it back to the front. Left foot steps back, High lunge. Soften that left knee. Tailbone is reaching down. Hands can come to the hips or to the skull and sacrum. Pause or add your pulses. So in this position with our left leg back in a high lunge, that left hip is in extension. That's when the hip or the leg moves behind the body, and our front leg, our right hip, is flexed. So flexion and extension is what we do the most. So let's externally rotate that left hip. Open to the side of your mat, squat, hold still in your squat or pulse. Let's keep alternating. Whenever you're ready, internally rotate the hip, turn it back to the front, and we'll just move in between those two things, our lunge and our squat. So this is a great way to challenge your hip stability and mobility and strength all in one. Working on rotating the hip, externally and internally, flexing and extending, as well as that weight shift or switching the way we're oriented so that we're out of the sagittal plane, which is that forward and back movement that we're mostly doing. So as we turn and open, we're in the frontal plane moving now, which is good for the hips because it's not just walking or running or biking. The next time you end up in your squat, let's pause. Straighten the legs, parallel the feet. Right foot crosses behind, curtsy squat, both knees bend. Tap the right toes. Keep going, curtsy squat to tap. Now we're abducting that right hip. We want to make sure we don't hike that right hip up, so our pelvis stays level. We're moving the hip, but not the pelvis. So if I were to be moving the pelvis, it would look like hiking the right hip up and sinking into that left hip. So hands at the sides is helpful to make sure we're not letting that side hike up. So you can give a little bit of a squeeze into the pelvis with the hands. Step it out to the right, parallel the feet, side lunges. So our hips are moving back. Our knees are bending, but our knees aren't going forward over the toes. Our hip creases are moving back. So you can think butt back as far as possible before you fall backwards. Pressing into the big toe, pinky toe, and heel. Side lunging at any pace, keeping that long spine. Step it back to the front of your mat. Standing on your left foot, let's float the right thigh up. That's flexing the hip. Push down into that left foot. Hold the pelvis still as you circle the right hip. Both directions. This is what we did in quadruped. Now we're standing. Let's see if we can keep everything else totally still and just isolate that right hip. So it might be much smaller than you think. Good, let's work that left hip now. Tap the right toes down. Now right ball of the foot taps back. Most of the weight is in that left foot. Now push into that left foot as you rise back up. Tap the right toes next to the left. Tap it back, hinging at that left hip. Spine stays long. Tap it forward. Left glute is really working to stabilize that left hip. If you're feeling comfortable with this movement, make it bigger by maybe floating that right leg up in a bent knee airplane and then tapping it down. Maybe reach it back, bent knee airplane, and tap. So we're moving our right hip, but our left hip is working way harder to stabilize. You can make it even bigger by reaching it back, bent knee airplane, and then flexing the hip, hovering the right foot off the ground. So just find what's feeling good and strong for you today. Keeping that long spine. Don't let the head drop down. Let's switch sides, step it down, float the left thigh up. Left hip is flexed. Circle that left hip. We're going to circle both directions. Think about your circles starting at the very top of that left thigh bone. So not the knee. That will probably be too big of a circle. Goal is to only move the hip, keeping the spine still. Pushing down into that right foot. Tap the left toes down. Now tap them behind you, hinging at that right hip crease moves back, tap it forward. Tap it back, torso starts coming forward toward the right thigh, tap it forward. Keep going. So just like our side lunges, our knee is bending, but the knee is not going forward toward the toe. The knee is bending because the right hip is moving back. So that's flexing the hip again. Add a little challenge if you want. Maybe float the leg and tap it forward. Now our goal is to make our movements bigger without changing the spine. Maybe you come to that float of the left thigh as it comes forward. So we're really working this right hip and glute. Keep it nice and active. Let that right ankle wiggle. Step it down, coming into a seated position. We'll sit with the arms behind us. Now, depending on what the shoulders in front of the chest feel like, it might be fingers out to the side, it might be fingers facing back a little bit more. So that will just depend on your shoulders. Let the knees bend. Drop the knees over toward the left. Back up. Drop the knees to the right. Now this might look very different than mine. It does not matter how far the knees go. Let's try to do this without rounding the back. So we're keeping the chest open or the chest broad as we work that hip mobility. So when our knees drop to the right, right hip is externally rotating while the left knee is internally rotating. And then we switch to the left, left hip externally rotates, right knee internally rotates. So just notice if you feel like one side is different. One side might feel a little bit more restricted. So this is a great thing to be doing every day. Most of us are really lacking in internal rotation because we don't do it very often. So adding this movement in, you can do it anytime. You could be watching TV, sitting on the floor with the kids, however you can work this movement in. Let's come onto our backs. Lying down, again, checking that triple S. That's the back of the skull on the ground, the shoulder blades, and the sacrum above the tailbone. Pick up that right foot. Let's flex the foot. So toes pull back toward the shin, dorsiflexing the ankle. Cross it over for figure four. Our right hip is externally rotated. Keep your low back down. You can take the right hand and push that right thigh away if you want. You can reach the arms out to the side or goalpost the arms if that feels good. Just don't let those front ribs pop up. Keep those shoulder blades down. You can also pick up your left foot without using the hands to grab and pull. So this is an active stretch. If we were to grab and pull into the stretch, that's a passive stretch. So we're still staying engaged here. You can rock side to side. You can windshield wiper that left shin. So what that's doing is just externally and internally rotating that left hip. That's another good way to sneak that hip mobility in. Or you can extend and bend the left knee. So if that feels like too much with the foot flex, just relax that left foot. That can get into a sciatic nerve glide. So if it feels like a zing that you don't like, skip it or don't flex the foot while you do this. Release it down, left foot comes down, hug your right knee in as much as you can, keeping that triple S down. Now this will be a passive stretch. Hands can come to the shin or behind that right thigh, and you're just gonna pull it in as much as it feels good. Keep the spine long. If it feels good to you, extend your left leg out and flex that left foot. But if that's feeling weird on the left hip or the left knee, just bring the foot to the mat again. So in this position, we're flexing passively the right hip, and we're getting maybe into a little bit of extension for the left hip. So this is kind of a nice way to just gently stretch into that left hip flexor. Try to slow your breath down or just deepen the breath. Release it down, feet come to the mat. Recheck that triple S is down. We're not arching the low back. The head is down. Pick up the left foot, dorsiflex the ankle. So pull your toes back toward the shin, externally rotate, cross it over for your figure four. Take any of those options for your arms. You can push it away with the hand. Now, if you want, float that right foot up. So as we pick that right foot up without using the hands, we're actively flexing our right hip as it pulls toward the torso. Then do whatever feels good here. Add that little internal and external rotation of the right hip. Rock along the sacrum. Straighten and bend that right knee. You can do something different than what you did on the first side. Doesn't need to be totally the same. Maybe this hip needs something a little different than the right hip. Make sure you're not holding your breath. Step that right foot down, hug your left thigh in, grab wherever you can. Pull it in, grab and pull, lengthening through the crown of the head. Maybe the right leg extends out, flex that right foot. Hold the sacrum down. Even here, imagine trying to pull your belly button down toward the ground. So keeping that low back really long. Deepen your breath. Release it down. You can bring your feet to the mat, make any extra movements or stretches that might feel good. And just pause here. Eyes can be open or closed. You can have your hands somewhere on your body or just resting at your sides. Take a few deep breaths. Check in with how the body feels, how the hips feel. And just send a grateful thought to your body for this practice today.